Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about glamour and romance. It was built on secrets, lies, and children hidden in plain sight. Behind the studio gates, some of cinema's biggest stars were having affairs that produced babies the world wasn't supposed to know about. Studios covered up pregnancies with fake adoptions, orphanages, and even cosmetic surgery on children. These weren't rumors. They were real scandals involving Clark Gable, Ingrid Bergman, Joan Crawford, and Errol Flynn. Some secrets lasted 60 years. 1. Clark Gable and Loretta Young. The 60-year secret. Let me tell you about one of the most extraordinary cover-ups in Hollywood history. A secret so well kept that it lasted nearly 6 decades, involving two of the biggest stars of the 1930s and a daughter who spent most of her life not knowing who her real father was. It started in 1935. Clark Gable was at the absolute peak of his fame. He was 34 years old and had just won an Academy Award for It Happened One Night. He was MGM's biggest star, their most valuable property, and arguably the most famous actor in the world. Women adored him. Men wanted to be him. He had that rakish charm, that dangerous smile, and those distinctive ears that everyone recognized. He was married to his second wife, Rhea Langham, though it wasn't a particularly happy marriage. But that was irrelevant. He was Clark Gable, and his personal life was whatever MGM said it was. Loretta Young was 22 years old, 12 years younger than Gable. She'd been acting since she was a child and had already appeared in dozens of films. By 1935, she'd become a major star at 20th Century Fox. She was beautiful, talented, and carefully cultivated a very specific image. She was a devout Catholic. This wasn't just publicity. Young went to Mass regularly, spoke openly about her faith, and her wholesome, moral image was central to her brand. She'd never been married, and in the Hollywood of that era, that actually enhanced her reputation. She was seen as pure, virtuous, almost untouchable. So when these two were cast together in Call of the Wild, based on the Jack London novel, nobody expected what would happen next. But here's the thing. They weren't filming on a Hollywood soundstage where studio executives could watch every move. They were shooting on location in Mount Baker, Washington, in the mountains, in November 1935. The conditions were primitive. The cast and crew were essentially isolated from civilization for weeks. And critically, they were far away from the watchful eyes of the studio system that normally controlled every aspect of stars' lives. The affair began during those weeks in the mountains. We don't know exactly how it started, but we know it happened. Two attractive, charismatic movie stars stuck in a remote location, long, cold nights, minimal supervision. The affair lasted approximately 6 to 8 weeks, the entire duration of the filming. Then, in January 1936, Loretta Young realized she was pregnant. Think about what this meant. She was an unmarried woman in 1936. Gable was married to someone else. She was a prominent Catholic, whose entire image was built on wholesomeness and moral virtue. If this news got out, her career wasn't just at risk, it was over, completely finished. The Catholic Church would condemn her. Her studio would drop her contract immediately. The public, who adored her as this pure, virtuous woman, would turn on her viciously. Unwed mothers in 1936 were social pariahs, and for a celebrity, the fall would be even harder. And Gable? Well, he'd take some heat, sure. There might be some bad press. His marriage might end. But let's be honest about the double standard of that era. He'd probably survive it. Men always did. MGM had too much money invested in him to let him go. He was too valuable. So Loretta had to make an impossible choice. Abortion was illegal and went against everything she believed in religiously. Having the baby openly meant destroying everything she'd worked for since childhood. She needed a plan, and it had to be airtight. In March 1936, Young announced to the press that she was exhausted and needed a break from filmmaking. She said she was going to England for an extended rest and vacation. Her mother, Gladys Royal, would accompany her. The press reported dutifully on her trip, and Hollywood wished her well. Except she never went to England. She was hiding in California. This was before the era of mass air travel, before paparazzi culture as we know it, before investigative tabloid journalism. If you had enough money and enough help, you could actually disappear. And Young did, with her mother's help. They moved between different private locations, staying completely out of sight. The studio knew what was happening and actively helped cover it up. That's how powerful the studio system was. If they wanted to hide something, it stayed hidden. On November 6, 1936, Loretta Young gave birth to a baby girl. But she didn't give birth in a hospital. Hospitals meant records, paperwork, questions, nurses and staff who might talk. She had the baby in a private home with a doctor who'd been paid to keep his mouth shut. The baby was named Judy. Now, you might think this is where Loretta would keep her baby close, figure out some way to raise her quietly, maybe claim she'd adopted her immediately. But that's not what happened. Instead, the baby was taken from her mother and placed in an orphanage. Not just one orphanage. Judy was moved between different institutions to avoid any pattern or questions. For 19 months, this infant lived in orphanages, cared for by strangers, while her mother returned to Hollywood and resumed her career. Think about that for a moment. Loretta Young went back to making movies, back to smiling for cameras, back to playing the wholesome Catholic star, while somewhere in Los Angeles, her daughter was in an institution. People who knew Young said her faith was genuine. This wasn't an act. She truly was devout. The guilt and pain must have been crushing. But she did it anyway because the alternative, admitting the truth, was unthinkable. Then, in 1937, Young made her move. She announced to the press that she was adopting 2 children, Judy and another little girl. She presented it as Christian charity, as a good Catholic woman giving orphans a loving home. The press praised her. Articles were written about her generosity and compassion. The Catholic Church commended her. Her wholesome image wasn't just intact, it was enhanced. Here was this beautiful, successful, unmarried actress being practically sainted for her kindness. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked where these children really came from. Both MGM and 20th Century Fox knew the truth about Judy's parentage, and both studios buried it completely. That's how the system worked. If protecting a star's image was good for business, then that's what happened. Truth was irrelevant. But Loretta couldn't control everything. As Judy grew older, she started looking exactly like Clark Gable. And I mean exactly. She had his distinctive large ears that stuck out prominently. She had his facial structure, his expressions, the way he smiled. The resemblance was unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. People in Hollywood noticed. They whispered about it at parties and premieres. Everyone in the inner circle knew or strongly suspected the truth. But nobody said anything publicly. That wasn't how Hollywood worked. There were things everyone knew, but nobody spoke about. And this was one of them. But Loretta knew people were noticing. The resemblance was too strong, too obvious. So when Judy was 7 years old, Loretta made a shocking decision. She had her daughter undergo cosmetic surgery to pin back her ears. This wasn't a medical necessity. It was purely to hide the resemblance to Gable. The surgery was experimental and painful. It left scars. Judy later described the experience as traumatic. But Loretta felt she had no choice. Those ears were too recognizable, too much like Gable's famous ones. Throughout all of this, Clark Gable said and did nothing. He knew Judy was his daughter. He saw her occasionally at Hollywood events and parties. Everyone in the know understood the situation, but he never acknowledged her, never paid child support, never tried to have any kind of relationship with her. He simply pretended she didn't exist. That was easier for him, and MGM certainly wasn't going to push him to claim an illegitimate daughter. Loretta maintained the fiction relentlessly. She told Judy over and over that she was adopted, that she should be grateful, that Loretta had rescued her from a terrible situation. She never wavered from the story. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. In 1958, when Judy was 23 years old, she started hearing comments from friends and acquaintances. People kept telling her she looked like Clark Gable. At first, she dismissed it, but the comments kept coming. So she started looking at photographs, old movie stills, magazine covers, publicity shots, and she saw it. The resemblance was undeniable, even with the surgically altered ears. She confronted her mother. "Am I Clark Gable's daughter?" Loretta denied it completely. She told Judy she was being ridiculous, that she needed to stop asking questions. She shut down the conversation. But Judy couldn't unsee what she'd seen. The question haunted her. 8 years later, in 1966, a movie producer who'd known both Gable and Young during that era pulled Judy aside. He told her directly, "You're Clark Gable's daughter. Everyone in Hollywood knows it." She confronted Loretta again, and this time, finally, her mother admitted the truth. Yes, Clark Gable was her father. Yes, everything had been a lie. But Loretta made Judy promise to keep it secret, to never tell anyone publicly, to protect Loretta's reputation. And remarkably, Judy agreed. Gable had died in 1960, so he was already gone. But Judy kept the secret for nearly 30 more years out of loyalty or guilt or some complicated mix of emotions about her mother. Finally, in 1994, Judy Lewis published a memoir called Uncommon Knowledge. She was 59 years old, and she told the entire story. The affair, the secret pregnancy, the orphanages, the fake adoption, the surgery, all of it. Loretta Young was still alive and was furious. At first, she denied parts of Judy's account. Then she admitted the affair happened, but claimed it was essentially a date rape, that Gable had forced himself on her. But people who'd been there during the filming, who'd seen them together, said this didn't match what they'd witnessed. It looked like two people having a consensual affair. The rape claims seemed like Loretta's final attempt to absolve herself of responsibility while being forced to admit the truth. Judy Lewis died in 2011 at age 76. She never received any inheritance from the Gable estate. She was never legally recognized as his daughter. She spent her entire life dealing with the psychological damage of being lied to, of having unnecessary surgery forced on her as a child, of spending her first 19 months warehoused in institutions while her mother pretended she didn't exist. Loretta Young died in 2000, and even at the end of her life she gave conflicting accounts of what had happened 65 years earlier. The secret had lasted nearly 6 decades, and it succeeded because of how Hollywood worked in that era. The studios controlled the media completely. The Catholic Church's influence protected Young. The stigma against unwed mothers was so severe that everyone understood why she felt she had to lie. And the technology didn't exist to prove paternity. No DNA tests, no way to force the truth. It was Hollywood's most successful cover-up, a conspiracy of silence involving 2 major studios, countless people who knew but said nothing, and a little girl who just wanted to know who her father was. 2. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. The Scandal That Destroyed a Career. Now this one is different. This scandal didn't stay secret. It exploded across the world and nearly destroyed one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Ingrid Bergman was one of the most beloved actresses in Hollywood. She'd starred in Casablanca, Gaslight, for which she won an Oscar, Notorious, and Joan of Arc. She wasn't just famous, she was seen as wholesome, moral, almost saintly. Her image was squeaky clean. She was married to Dr. Peter Lindstrom, a neurosurgeon. They had a daughter, Pia, who was 10 years old. They lived in Rochester, New York, and from the outside, everything looked perfect. Roberto Rossellini was an Italian film director, one of the pioneers of neorealism. He'd made Rome, Open City, and Paisan, serious, critically acclaimed films. He was married to actress Marcella de Marchis. He had a son from that marriage, plus he had another son with actress Anna Magnani. So both of them were married. Both had children, and both were about to blow up their lives. Bergman saw Rossellini's films and was fascinated by them. They were so different from Hollywood productions, raw, real, powerful. She wrote him a letter in 1948. Basically said, "I'm a huge admirer of your work. If you ever need an actress who speaks Swedish, Italian, English, and German, I'm available." Rossellini wrote back. They started corresponding, and he invited her to Italy to make a film with him, Stromboli. March 1949. Bergman arrived in Italy to start filming. She left her husband and daughter behind in America. She told everyone she'd be back in a few months. The affair with Rossellini began almost immediately. They weren't subtle about it. Italian tabloids started reporting on it. There were photographs of them together, clearly involved. But here's what made it explosive. Ingrid Bergman was still married. And she was pregnant. December 1949. Bergman was still in Italy, and rumors were swirling. American reporters kept asking if she was having an affair with Rossellini. She denied it. She said they were just friends, just colleagues working on a film. But everyone could see what was happening. Her marriage to Lindstrom was falling apart. Her husband filed for divorce in Los Angeles, citing desertion. And then the bomb dropped. February 1950. Bergman's attorney confirmed it. She was pregnant with Rossellini's child. She was still technically married to Lindstrom. The divorce wasn't final yet. The American public lost their minds. This wasn't just any actress having an affair. This was Ingrid Bergman, the woman who'd played Joan of Arc, who'd been held up as a symbol of purity and wholesomeness. And she'd abandoned her husband and 10-year-old daughter to have an affair with a married Italian director and gotten pregnant out of wedlock. Newspapers condemned her. Religious groups denounced her. Women's clubs called for boycotts of her films. And then it got worse. Senator Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado went to the floor of the United States Senate and gave a speech attacking Bergman. He called her a powerful influence on evil. He said she was a horrible example of womanhood and a powerful influence on evil. He introduced a bill to require Hollywood to get a license from the government and to give the government power to revoke licenses for moral violations. A senator, on the Senate floor, attacking an actress by name. That's how big this scandal was. February 2nd, 1950. Bergman gave birth to a son, Robertino. She was still married to Lindstrom at the time. The divorce wasn't finalized until that month. Rossellini was also in the process of getting divorced from his wife. May 1950. As soon as both divorces were final, Bergman and Rossellini got married in Mexico. But the damage was done. Hollywood turned its back on Bergman completely. Her career in American films was over. RKO was supposed to release Stromboli. They released it with minimal promotion, and it flopped. Studios that had been begging her to make films wouldn't touch her. She stayed in Italy and Europe. She and Rossellini had twin daughters in 1952, Isabella and Isotta. Isabella Rossellini would later become a famous model and actress herself. Bergman made films in Italy, but they weren't successful. Her career had collapsed. The woman who'd been one of Hollywood's biggest stars was essentially exiled. This lasted for 7 years. A producer named Buddy Adler approached Bergman about a role in Anastasia, to be filmed in England. Would American audiences accept her again? 20th Century Fox took a chance. The film was released in late 1956, and something remarkable happened. American audiences forgave her. Critics praised her performance. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Cary Grant accepted the Oscar on her behalf because she was in Paris and didn't want to face the American press. But Hollywood had welcomed her back. Bergman's marriage to Rossellini fell apart in the late 1950s. He had an affair with an Indian screenwriter and had a child with her. They divorced in 1957, but Bergman's career was back. She made Indiscreet with Cary Grant. She played television. She returned to Broadway. By the 1960s and 70s, she was working steadily again, and the scandal had faded into Hollywood history. She died in 1982 on her 67th birthday, the same day as her final performance aired on television. Here's what made the Bergman-Rossellini affair different from the Gable-Young secret. It wasn't secret at all. It was completely public, completely exposed, and it destroyed Bergman's career for years. With Gable and Young, the system protected them. With Bergman, she was outside the system, in Italy, beyond the control of Hollywood studios, and she paid an enormous price for it. 3. Joan Crawford. The Adoption Mystery. This one is murkier, more complicated, and parts of it may never be fully known. But let me tell you what we do know. Joan Crawford was one of the biggest stars of the 1930s and 40s. She'd clawed her way up from poverty to become a Hollywood icon. She was married 4 times, to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Franchot Tone, Philip Terry, and Alfred Steele. And she desperately wanted children. Crawford claimed she couldn't have biological children. She said she'd had miscarriages, that pregnancy was impossible for her. So in the 1940s, she began adopting children. 1940, she adopted a daughter, Christina. 1943, she adopted a son, Christopher, born Philip Terry Jr., renamed after her divorce. 1947, she adopted twin daughters, Kathy and Cynthia. That's the official story. 4 adopted children. A generous movie star giving orphans a home. But rumors circulated for decades that at least some of these adoptions weren't really adoptions at all. Christina Crawford was adopted in 1940. Crawford was married to Philip Terry at the time, though the marriage was already struggling. The adoption was handled privately and quietly. There were questions about where Christina actually came from. Some people close to Crawford believed Christina was actually her biological child from an affair, presented as an adoption to avoid scandal. Why would people think this? First, Crawford's claims about being unable to have children were never medically verified publicly. It was just something she said. Second, the timing was suspicious. Crawford disappeared from public view for a period in 1939-1940, claiming she was ill or exhausted, the same excuse Loretta Young used. Third, the adoption was arranged through back channels, not through official agencies. This was common in Hollywood. Stars would have private attorneys handle adoptions to avoid publicity and paperwork. We don't actually know the truth. Christina Crawford herself, who later wrote the damning memoir Mommy Dearest about her abusive childhood with Joan, never claimed to be her biological child. She identified as adopted. There's no DNA evidence, No secret documents have emerged. No deathbed confessions. It's possible Joan Crawford had biological children and presented them as adoptions. It's also possible she really did adopt all 4 children legitimately. We simply don't know. Hollywood insiders believed it because it fit a pattern they'd seen before. Loretta Young did it. Other actresses were rumored to have done it. If you got pregnant out of wedlock in the 1930s and 40s, adopting your own child was one way to handle it. Also, Crawford was known to be, let's say, flexible with the truth. Her whole life story was carefully constructed mythology. She lied about her age, her background, her past. So people assumed she might lie about this too. But assumption isn't proof. What we do know is that private adoptions in Hollywood during this era were often shady. Actresses would work with specific doctors and lawyers who would arrange for babies to be placed with them, no questions asked. Some of these were legitimate adoptions of children who needed homes. Some were babies born to the actresses themselves. Some were babies bought from desperate women who couldn't afford to raise them. The system was deliberately opaque. That was the point. Whether Crawford was hiding her own biological children or simply adopting through this murky system, we can't say for certain. 4. Errol Flynn. The serial philanderer's hidden legacy. Errol Flynn was different from the others. He didn't hide his affairs, he was notorious for them, but he did leave behind children he never acknowledged. Flynn was the ultimate swashbuckling star of the 1930s and 40s. Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, The Seahawk. He was handsome, charming, and absolutely reckless in his personal life. He was married 3 times. Lily DeMita, 1935-1942, Nora Eddington, 1943-1949, Patrice Wymore, 1950-1959, until his death. But marriages didn't slow him down. He had affairs constantly. With actresses, extras, fans, random women he met in bars. He was completely open about it. It was part of his image, the rakish adventurer who couldn't be tied down. Flynn was charged with statutory rape of 2 teenage girls, Betty Hansen and Peggy Satterley. The trial was a sensation. He was ultimately acquitted, and there's debate about whether the charges were legitimate or a setup. But it established Flynn's reputation as someone who slept around indiscriminately. Flynn had 4 legitimate children from his 3 marriages, but he also fathered children outside of marriage. The most documented case, Arnella Roma Flynn. Flynn had an affair with a woman while he was filming in Rome. She became pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter. The child was given the name Roma in honor of where she was conceived. Flynn knew about her. He sent money occasionally, but he never publicly acknowledged her as his daughter. She grew up in relative obscurity. There were rumors of other children, a son in Jamaica, a daughter in Mexico. Flynn's lifestyle and his travels meant he could have fathered children all over the world. Flynn's case was different because he wasn't trying to hide these affairs to protect a wholesome image. Everyone knew he was sleeping around. His image was built on being a playboy. But he didn't acknowledge or support these children. He didn't take responsibility. He just moved on. When he died in 1959 at age 50, from years of hard living, alcohol, drugs, reckless behavior, there was no comprehensive accounting of all his possible children. Some came forward later claiming to be his offspring. Some claims were probably true. Some probably weren't. Flynn represented a type of male Hollywood star who got away with behavior that would have destroyed a female star's career. He had affairs with teenagers, legal at the time but ethically questionable. He left behind children he didn't support. He was a terrible husband and father, and his career never suffered for it. Men went to his movies. Women still found him charming. The double standard was stark.